Of all 197 countries on planet Earth, there are of course a few obscure countries that we all tend to misunderstand and judge for various reasons. Maybe it's how militarized they are, or maybe it's because they drive on the opposite side of the road. Whatever the reason, each country is unique in its own way, but there are a few that stand out to us like a sore thumb. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, otherwise known as North Korea, is just one example. Although this country and what's hidden within its borders may pique our interests, no one is allowed in or out of the country without the proper government documentation and permission. But North Korea isn't the only country with strict borders and little to no knowledge as to what it holds on the inside. In fact, there are a few countries on Earth that aren't recognized by the bulk of the world's nations, with little to no knowledge about what they hold within their unrecognized borders. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Soviet Union disbanded into 15 countries that we know today as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. Although all of these countries still exist today, there's one country in particular that I left out for various reasons, mainly because it's not recognized by any countries that currently exist today. In fact, most people tend to question whether or not this is even considered a country at all. The Transnistrian Moldavian Republic, otherwise known as Transnistria, is an unrecognized breakaway region located between Moldova and Ukraine. After World War II, when the Soviet Union had carved up their portion of Europe and ultimately created the Soviet bloc countries, Moscow had created the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic, mainly from two geographical and ethnic regions in the area. The primarily Russian-speaking Dniester region to the east, formerly an autonomous area located in Ukraine, and to the west, the region of Bessarabia, which was originally part of Romania from 1918 to 1940. As the Soviet Union began to collapse in the late 1980s and early 1990s, growing Moldavian nationalism led to tensions rising between the two regions. On the 31st of August in 1989, the Supreme Court of the Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic decided to adopt Moldavian as the official language of Moldova, which in turn increased tensions. The ethnic Russian and Ukrainian minorities within the country felt threatened by the growing nationalism and the idea of removing Russian as the official language of Moldova. Transnistria's linguistic and ethnic background was much different than that of the rest of Moldova, so by removing Russian as their primary language, the ethnic Russian and Ukrainian minorities began to feel very threatened. With tensions rising throughout the region, it wasn't long before Transnistria declared its independence in September of 1990. As Transnistria began to establish its independence, it wasn't long before violence in the region escalated into an all-out conflict. In October of 1990, volunteer militias were formed in Transnistria, and clashes began as early as November of 1990. When the Soviet Union collapsed, under various agreements, their military equipment was also split with the former Soviet states, including Moldova. In April of 1992, Moldova created its own defense ministry, and military engagements between the two regions began shortly after. Fighting had intensified in the weeks following the establishment of the Moldovan Defense Ministry, and mainly culminated in a large engagement on the right bank of the Dniester region in June of 1992, where up to 700 people were killed. Not long after, a ceasefire was signed in July of 1992, and Moldova has since had no effective control over the region of Transnistria. Although by 1992, Transnistria had established its own borders, military, government, currency, flag, president, and more, nations all across the world continue to not recognize Transnistria's independence. Often referred to as the last vestiges of the Soviet Union, inside the country, statues of Lenin still remain on public buildings. The notorious hammer and sickle of the Soviet Union can be seen all across the country on banners and billboards, and plenty of Soviet-era ways are still practiced to this day. Although the idea of Transnistria isn't such a heated issue anymore in today's day and age, Transnistria has been in the news again lately regarding the war between Russia and Ukraine. Although Transnistria isn't recognized by any countries today, many people fear that Transnistria, with many ethnic Russians, may be the source of a new front in the ongoing war. Russia also has a total of 1,500 troops within the borders of Transnistria for peacekeeping purposes, but many fear that at some point, Transnistria will become the basis for the next front in the Ukrainian war. Although this may be far from a reality, with growing desperation from Russian forces, Vladimir Putin might become desperate enough to utilize these troops in the region. Although Transnistria does exist in today's world, to the outside world, it's nothing more than a de facto breakaway state, housing a total of 500,000 people, trapped in a state of limbo. Simply an old Soviet memory, lost to time, located within the borders of a young, modern Moldovan democracy.